Vietnam families never knew the chilling fate of America's missing prisoners of war. This is the story they were never allowed to hear, and never allowed to forget. Saigon has fallen. It is April 1975. A radio on a kitchen counter in Ohio hisses with static as a mother waits for a name that never comes. 90 seconds later, a second list is read. Still nothing. The war's over for most of America. But not for her, because official numbers say 591 prisoners of war returned in 1973, yet thousands of names remained marked as missing, unknown, unburied. Some families received letters with no return address. Some heard rumors of secret camps beyond the border, deep in the mountains of Laos and Cambodia. In one photo, a string of palm trees looks like a code. In another, a scratched metal spoon carries initials that match a man long presumed dead. Coincidence? Or a message? Tonight we open the files. We follow the whispers. We step into rooms that still keep a bed made up for a son who never came home, and then we confront a single chilling clue pulled from a declassified report. A clue that suggests someone kept breathing long after the last parade. What happened to those men? And why were their families kept in the dark? The clock is still ticking, and the silence is not an answer. The last night of the war listened to the clock. It is an old kitchen clock, the kind that ticks like a heartbeat. Every family in this story has one, and in the late spring of 1975, the hands refused to move. The war has climbed the stairs of their houses and settled in the photographs on their walls. The television says the conflict is over, but the quiet inside these rooms feels like a lie. In one of these houses, a mother sets a plate at the table for a son who has not walked through the door in 6 years. She keeps his place in perfect order, fork to the left, knife to the right, napkin folded as if he might come home from a long shift and collapse into the chair. Her son's name is on a list. Not the list that rolled across the bottom of the news during the joyous flights home in 1973, when the world watched men in worn uniforms step into the sun. No, her son lives on the other list. The list that sits in Washington filing cabinets. The one marked missing, unaccounted, the one that never stops growing. The camera moves from her kitchen to a window in Hanoi, where the night is warm and stirs like breath. Across the city, a gate is closed with a heavy clang. Inside, a guard pauses to light a cigarette. There are no parades here, only silence in courtyards and footsteps on stone. Somewhere beyond the gate, somewhere past the sour smell of boiled rice and wet cloth, a small metal spoon lies under a bunk. Its handle is etched with initials, 3 letters, shallow and hurried, the way a man marks time when he has nothing left to measure it with. Maybe it is nothing. Maybe it is a message. In this story, nothing is ever only one thing. 2 years earlier, in the spring of 1973, the world watched a miracle on live TV. Operation Homecoming brought 591 American prisoners of war out of captivity and into the arms of a nation desperate to feel good about itself again. Cameras captured smiles and salutes and the slow release of breath you hear when suffering pauses, even for a moment. It looked like an ending. It felt like the last page. But numbers, like memories, can be cruel. As the flights landed, as speeches were made, as flags were folded and stored, another figure hovered like a ghost. It was the number of those still not accounted for. Families memorized it the way they memorized birthdays. They repeated it until it tasted like iron. The sunrise had come, and their window was still dark. The mother at the kitchen table wears a bracelet. The metal is thin and worn smooth by years of habit. On that strip of metal there is a date, a rank, a name. She never takes it off. When she washes dishes, it clinks softly against the sink. When she sleeps, it is cold against her wrist. The bracelet began as a sign of solidarity, a way to keep faith with men the world was trying to forget. For her, it became something else. A promise. And a sentence. A knock at her door arrives the way bad news always does, sudden but somehow expected. She recognizes the uniform through the glass and feels her stomach fall through the floorboards. The officer removes his hat. There were protocols for this during the war, precise methods for telling a family that a life had ended. Now the tone is different, polite, careful, officially cautious. He does not say her son is dead, he cannot. He does not say her son is alive, he cannot. He says there are no further updates at this time, that certain records are being reviewed, that inquiries are ongoing. His words float in the air like ash. They leave the taste of nothing. 1,000 miles away, another family folds a letter that arrived with no return address and no stamp they recognize. The paper is cheap and thin, and the words tilt downhill as if the writer's hand were shaking. It says a man with their son's name was seen in a place that does not appear on any official report. It says the man looked older, thinner, the way men look when time is a wound. It says he was alive, at least then. The letter is unsigned. The date is smeared. The ink has bled in the creases. But a sentence inside bites into the mother's mind and refuses to let go. He told me to tell you he never stopped trying. Rumors gather like thunderheads. Some speak of camps hidden in karst mountains, where the air smells of limestone and rain, and where men turn the same routines into rituals so they do not go mad. Some speak of prisons rolled to new locations like traveling carnivals, their walls not made of stone but of fear and habit. Others talk about names transported across borders, traded like cards between men in suits. Each name a number in an equation too cold for the human mouth. The truth might be simpler. It might be uglier. It might be both. On a desk in Washington, 4 folders wait like gravestones. Each folder holds a life reduced to paper, reports, transcripts, maps with red pencil circles around places where nothing was supposed to be. A photograph clipped to a memo shows a pattern cut into a rice field, a pattern that, from the air, looks shockingly like characters scratched by a man who knows the alphabet could be a ladder if he builds it tall enough. The analyst who sees the pattern notes that it could be a coincidence. He writes that word twice. Coincidence, he underlines it once. And then he stares at the photo for a long time because coincidences become heavier when a mother keeps a bed made for a son in a house that no longer feels like a home. We return to the mother with the bracelet. She has learned to read the sky for signs that do not exist. Some days she reads the clouds and decides they are telling her to wait. Other days the clouds are mean and heavy and low, and she wants to knock on the door of the world and demand an answer. She attends meetings with other families. They pass photocopies of dispatches as if sharing recipes. They speak in numbers, dates, initials, grid coordinates. They cling to each other because the country is tired and wishes to move on, and these women refuse to let time lift the anchor. The most dangerous sentence in their world is also the most common. We may never know. Here is the first payoff, the first hard edge against which the story scrapes. In a batch of files declassified years after the last helicopter left the last rooftop, there is a line no one forgot. It says that on a date after the peace agreement, a voice on a radio used a call sign tied to a man listed as missing. It is not proof. It is not closure. But it is a handprint on a window, smudged and fading, evidence that someone stood alive on the other side and tried to be seen. The families read that line and look at their bracelets as if the metal might turn warm. If you want these hidden lines pulled into the light, if you want more names, more maps, more voices recovered from static, stay with us. Share this story with someone who believes in endings. Subscribe so you do not miss the next page. Because the next page is not theory. It is testimony, dates, places you can touch on a map, and it changes how you read everything that came before. Now we go to a runway. It is night and a light rain is falling. This is one of the flights from Operation Homecoming in 1973. Families press against a rope line while a cargo door opens and a ramp lowers. Cameras catch the shine on the metal. A man appears, thin but standing straight, eyes scanning the crowd as if trying to learn a new language in a single breath. He brings with him a menu of habits learned in captivity. Eat quickly, speak softly, trust nothing that comes easily. When he sees his wife, his face fractures into tears he has not permitted for years. The crowd applauds, and he turns his head slightly, almost as if listening for footsteps no one else can hear. He is out, but he is not alone. Not in his mind. Not in his memories. He knows men who did not walk up that ramp. He knows corridors that still echo. He knows the difference between the sound a lock makes when it is opened for show and the sound it makes when a life is being measured. The paper maze. The story begins not in the jungle, but in a quiet government hallway lined with fluorescent lights that hum like insects. Inside, the air smells of dust and typewriter ink. It's 1977, 4 years after the last prisoners of war stepped off the planes. The headlines have faded, the flags have been folded away, and America has chosen to heal through forgetting. But in these hallways, forgetting is impossible. Because here, on desks piled high with folders, the missing still live, trapped inside paperwork. A clerk in a gray suit opens a file marked classified. Inside is a photograph, a report, and a note stapled to the corner, awaiting verification. It's the same note used on hundreds of cases. Each sheet of paper holds a man's name, his rank, and the coordinates where he vanished. To most, it's just data, but to the families who wait outside the system, each line is a heartbeat. Each red stamp of no further information is another funeral without a body. In a small house in Kansas, that same year, a mother named Ellen sits at her kitchen table, surrounded by papers of her own, letters she has written to senators, military offices, anyone who might listen. Her son's name is Captain Michael Anders. He was 28 when his plane went down over northern Vietnam. She's received 2 official letters since then. The first said he was missing. The second, 5 years later, said his case was under review. She reads that phrase again and again, as if hidden meaning might rise from the ink. At night, Ellen listens to the radio static and wonders if her son's voice might somehow be caught in the waves between stations. She's not alone in that thought. Across the country, a quiet network of families begins to connect. Letters passed hand to hand, secret meetings in living rooms, late-night phone calls whispered over rotary dials. They are mothers, wives, and sisters. They call themselves the League of Families. Their mission is simple: to force the government to keep looking, even when everyone else wants to stop. Ellen becomes their heartbeat. She learns how to read military forms the way a codebreaker reads a cipher. Every comma, every missing signature might mean something. She notices that some files have dates that don't make sense, reports filed months after a supposed death, sightings recorded but never followed up. The inconsistencies gnaw at her. She writes to the Pentagon demanding answers. Weeks later, she receives a thin envelope. Inside is a single page. It says, "Your inquiry has been received. No additional information is available at this time." The page smells faintly of ink and hopelessness, but then something changes. In early 1978, an anonymous package arrives at a journalist's office in Washington. No name, no return address. Inside are copies of military memos and intelligence cables marked confidential. One document stands out. It lists names of men reportedly alive in Laos, names matching those long marked as missing. The handwriting on the cover sheet is messy, as if written in haste. Check coordinates. They move the camp. The journalist publishes part of the leak. For one brief week, America listens again. Cameras return to living rooms where the League gathers. Ellen watches the news through tears. For the first time in years, she dares to believe her son might still be alive. Then, silence. Within days, the story disappears. Officials deny the authenticity of the documents. They call it confusion, clerical error, Cold War propaganda. Files vanish from archives. Reporters move on to other headlines. But the families, hardened by years of silence, don't stop. They begin to suspect something darker, that truth itself has been buried deliberately. Late one night, Ellen receives a phone call from another mother, Ruth, whose husband was also listed as missing. Ruth's voice trembles. She says she's seen a photograph, a blurry image taken by a European tourist near the Laotian border. In the background, behind a fence of bamboo, stands a man in tattered clothes. His posture, his height, even the shape of his jaw looks familiar. She swears it's her husband. The photo disappears into government hands within days. The official response: image cannot be verified, but the League begins collecting their own evidence. Maps, sightings, even coded notes found carved into rocks by locals. They compile everything into binders thicker than Bibles. Each page another plea. Do not let them fade. In one binder, a chilling discovery surfaces. A radio intercept from 1974, never publicly released, mentions an American voice using a familiar call sign, one officially listed as deceased 2 years earlier. The analyst who reviewed it had scribbled in the margin, "Transmission cut abruptly. Possible distress signal." Ellen reads that line until the words blur. The idea that her son or someone like him might have been alive long after his supposed death burns in her mind like a fever. By 1979, the League takes their fight to Congress. Cameras flash, microphones hum, and a sea of bracelets glints under fluorescent light. Ellen stands at the podium, trembling but steady. She holds up her son's last letter, its paper worn thin at the folds. Her voice shakes as she says, "If our sons are dead, show us proof. If they are alive, bring them home. But do not ask us to live in the space between." The room falls silent. Reporters write down every word. Behind her, senators exchange looks, uneasy, political. Because by now, it's not just about missing men. It's about secrets, about whether America left its own behind. That night, Ellen returns to her hotel room. A brown envelope waits under her door. Inside are two photographs, both grainy black and white. One shows a jungle clearing, the other a line of prisoners walking barefoot in mud. The back of the second photo has a note. Taken 1978, Northern Laos. Ellen feels her heart hammer. She stares at one face in the line of prisoners. It's not clear. The features blur in shadow, but something in her refuses to dismiss it. The slope of the shoulders, the way the man's head tilts toward the ground, just as Michael did when deep in thought. She tucks the photo into her purse, afraid to hope, terrified not to. Weeks later, the Pentagon holds a press conference. They announce a new review of unresolved cases. Officials assure the public that every lead is being investigated. Cameras click, questions are asked, carefully answered. Behind the podium, one aide slips a single sheet of paper into a folder. The header reads, Unconfirmed Captivity, Post-1973. The sheet contains 3 names. One of them is Captain Michael Anders. For Ellen, the world spins. Proof almost, but when she demands to see the document, she's told it's not available for civilian access. She stands in the hallway outside the office, shaking, feeling the weight of every unanswered letter she's ever sent. Down the hall, a janitor wheels his cart past her. The squeak of the wheels echoes like a ticking clock, and then the story turns again. A whistleblower inside the Defense Intelligence Agency contacts a reporter, claiming the U.S. government had received multiple verified reports of live American prisoners in Southeast Asia well into the late 1970s, but those reports were buried to avoid reigniting tensions with Hanoi. It was never about proof, the man says. It was about politics. Ellen never learns the whistleblower's name. The story makes headlines for 2 days, then disappears again, drowned beneath bureaucratic statements. But the damage is done. For those who've waited, denial no longer feels like ignorance. It feels like strategy. One evening, Ellen sits alone, the room dim except for a lamp's soft circle of light. She takes out the photograph again. This time, she notices something she missed before. A faint marking on the bamboo fence behind the prisoners. It looks like scratches or maybe letters. She holds the photo close. Her breath catches. It's hard to tell, but she swears she can see it. 3 faint initials carved into the wood. She drops the photo, trembling. Could it be coincidence? Could it be desperation shaping what she wants to see? She presses her hands over her mouth, torn between belief and fear. Outside, the rain begins to fall against the window, soft at first, then harder, until it drowns every other sound. Somewhere halfway across the world, the jungle listens to, and in the next moment of silence, something stirs in the darkness of those mountains. An echo, a whisper, a breath that has not yet decided whether it belongs to the living or the dead. Signals in the dark it began with a hum, barely audible, buried deep in static. To most, it was nothing. To a trained ear, it was a heartbeat. In 1981, 8 years after the last known American prisoner of war came home, an amateur radio operator in Oregon claimed to have picked up a faint Morse signal repeating 3 letters. M-A-C. He recorded it, certain it was meaningless, until he realized those same letters matched the initials of a pilot missing over Laos. He sent the tape to Washington. They thanked him politely and filed it away. Case closed. But a week later, 2 more signals came from a different frequency, same region, same rhythm. Rumors spread like wildfire. Were the missing men still trying to reach home through static, years after the world stopped listening? The Pentagon denied it. Natural interference, they said. Coincidence. But coincidence was a word families had learned to mistrust. Ellen heard about the signal on the evening news. She leaned forward in her chair, eyes locked on the reporter's face, barely breathing. The anchor moved on to another story, but her mind stayed behind, on that sound. 3 letters. A heartbeat hidden in the dark. That night, she called Ruth. They heard something, she whispered. They heard something again. Across the ocean, a different silence ruled. The jungles of Laos had swallowed the war, but not its ghosts. In small villages, elders told stories of white men who lived in cages beyond the tree line, guarded by soldiers who vanished at sunset. They were ghosts, one man said, but they bled like us. Western journalists who tried to investigate met with warnings, arrests, or worse. Some returned with blurred photos, others with nothing but fear in their eyes. Then came the story that broke through. A former Laotian soldier now living in Thailand claimed he had escorted American captives years after the peace agreement. He described a camp with bamboo walls and rusted barbed wire. He said the prisoners built bridges for local militias, repairing them after every flood.
They were thin, he said softly.
They still saluted the flag that wasn't there. The U.S. government dismissed his account as unverified. But buried in the footnotes of an internal report, someone had written, details consistent with known coordinates. Ellen read those words in a photocopy smuggled to her by a sympathetic journalist. She couldn't sleep. The image of her son standing in a jungle clearing, older, thinner, his face shadowed but alive, took root in her dreams. Each morning she woke with a single thought pulsing in her chest. What if he's still waiting? In March 1982, a new group formed, a mix of ex-soldiers, radio technicians, and investigative reporters. They called themselves Operation Resolve. They raised money quietly, took leaves from work, and boarded planes to Thailand. Their mission was simple: find proof that someone was still out there. The team reached the Mekong River under heavy rain. On the other side lay Laos, green, endless, forbidden. Local guides warned them not to cross. The jungle keeps secrets, one said, and it punishes those who try to take them. But one night, under the cover of darkness, they did. The jungle swallowed them whole. Every sound felt alive: the buzz of insects, the hiss of rain on leaves, the distant cry of something unseen. After 2 days of moving through mud and vines, they found what they came for: a clearing with old wooden posts, half-collapsed walls, and the remnants of wire fencing. A rusted plate lay buried in dirt, engraved faintly with something that made their blood run cold. U.S., scratched by hand. Nearby they found bones. Human bones. Not old enough to be ancient, not new enough to be fresh. They returned to Thailand and sent everything to Washington. The photos, the coordinates, the artifact. Weeks later, a response came back. Site determined to be unrelated to American personnel. No further explanation. The team disbanded soon after, but the leader, a veteran named Thomas Reed, didn't stop. He claimed the evidence was altered, that their photographs were darker when returned, as if something had been erased. Ellen met Reed that autumn. They sat in a small diner, the smell of coffee heavy in the air. He looked tired, haunted. "I saw a name," he said quietly. "Carved into the wood near the fence." He paused, as if unsure whether to continue. It said Monsieur Anders, faded but there. Her hand trembled on the table. "You're certain?" He nodded once. "I wish I wasn't." For weeks after, Ellen lived between two worlds, the one where her son was gone, and the one where he wasn't. She began dreaming of a forest where voices echoed through rain, whispering half-finished words. Every morning she woke with her heart racing, certain she had heard her name. Meanwhile, new intelligence leaked. Satellite photos showing strange geometric shapes carved into rice paddies. To the untrained eye, they were farming patterns. To analysts, they looked like coded symbols, letters and numbers resembling military escape codes. Again, officials dismissed them. Coincidences, they said. But those who had once been prisoners of war looked closer. "That's not coincidence," one of them said in a TV interview. "That's communication." The public began to whisper again. Late-night talk shows, newspapers, even senators demanded answers. If the war had truly ended, why did the evidence refuse to die? In the middle of this storm, Ellen received one more letter. It was postmarked from Bangkok. No name. Inside, a single page. The handwriting was shaky, but the words burned clear. "Your son lives." They keep them for reasons you wouldn't believe. Her knees nearly gave out. She sat at her kitchen table, letter in hand, the same table where she'd eaten in silence for years. The words echoed through her head. He lives. For the first time in a decade, hope hurt more than grief. She took the letter to the League, to journalists, to anyone who would listen. But no one could verify it. The source had vanished. Some said it was a cruel hoax. Others whispered it came from someone inside. Days later, Thomas Reed disappeared while traveling in northern Thailand. His hotel room was found empty, his notes gone. Only his camera remained, film undeveloped. When the rolls were processed, one image stood out, a blurry photo of a distant clearing, smoke curling from the trees. And on the edge of that frame, half hidden in mist, A figure stood watching the lens. Ellen stared at that photo for hours, tracing the outline of the man's face. It was impossible to tell who he was, but deep in her bones something whispered. She could feel it. The story wasn't over. Outside, the world kept moving. News shifted to new wars, new crises. The League's meetings grew smaller. But for Ellen, every night was still filled with static. Sometimes, when the wind was just right, she swore she could hear that faint pulse again, the same signal that started it all. 3 letters repeating through the dark, A-C. And as the years stretched on, one question grew louder than ever. If voices were still calling from the shadows, why did no one want to answer? The jungle still breathes. The air hums with secrets. And somewhere beneath that endless green canopy, something waits, patient, silent, and unfinished. The bargains no one saw the world moved on. New wars began. New names filled the newspapers. But in certain rooms, quiet, windowless rooms, old wars never ended. They simply changed shape. It was 1985 when the first rumors began to surface. Not in Washington, not in Hanoi, but in Geneva. A small group of diplomats met behind closed doors, discussing something not listed on the official agenda. The minutes of that meeting were never released, but one note from an aide leaked years later. It contained only 6 words. The prisoners remain leverage for negotiation. No one outside that circle knew what it meant. But for families like Ellen's, it explained everything: the silence, the denials, the vanishing evidence. That same year, Ellen was invited to testify again before Congress. The hearing room smelled of polished wood and old air. Cameras lined the walls, but the audience was thin. America's memory had grown tired of grief. She stood before the committee, holding the same photograph she'd carried for years. The one with the shadowed figure behind the bamboo fence. "If my son is gone," she said, "show me his grave. If he's alive, stop pretending he isn't." The committee members shifted in their chairs. Some looked at their watches. One man, young and newly elected, leaned forward. "Mrs. Anders," he said gently, "what makes you so certain your son is still alive?" She didn't blink, because the government keeps changing its story. There was no applause, no anger, just silence. The kind that tells you truth has walked into the room, uninvited. That night, as Ellen left the building, a man in a dark coat stepped from the shadows. His voice was low, urgent. "You don't know what you're asking for," he said. She turned to face him, but his eyes darted to the street. "Some of them," he whispered, "were moved. Not killed, moved." Then he was gone, swallowed by traffic and rain. 2 weeks later, a new leak surfaced. A diplomatic cable, classified at the highest level, revealed that negotiations with Vietnam had included sensitive human subjects. The phrase alone sparked outrage. What did it mean, human subjects? When reporters pressed for details, officials refused to comment. But behind closed doors, whispers began to take shape, that the missing men had been used as currency in political bargaining. Their existence acknowledged only when convenient. Ellen's faith, already stretched thin, fractured into fury. She wrote letters to anyone who would listen, senators, journalists, even the president. Most went unanswered. One came back, unsigned, containing only a single line typed in courier font. "You're closer than you realize. Stop digging." The warning didn't stop her. Meanwhile, halfway around the world, the Cold War was reaching its fever pitch. Intelligence agencies from every superpower prowled Southeast Asia like scavengers. The jungles of Laos and Cambodia became chessboards for secret deals. Soviet advisors trained local militias. American operatives moved quietly, still chasing the ghosts of a war their country swore was over. Somewhere in those forests, lives were still unaccounted for, and someone knew exactly why. Thomas Reed, presumed dead after disappearing in Thailand, suddenly resurfaced. A letter arrived at Ellen's door, postmarked from Singapore. The handwriting was unmistakable. "They traded men for silence," it read. "Not all were killed. Some were held until the price was right. There are files. Warehouse near Arlington. Look for code. Phoenix return." Ellen didn't know whether to believe it. She brought the letter to the League, but by then the group had dwindled. Many of the original members had passed away or surrendered to time. Still, a few remained, tired, stubborn, bound together by hope that refused to die. One of them, a retired pilot named Jack Dorsey, offered to help. "I know someone," he said. "Used to work security for the archives. If the files exist, he'll find them." They met the contact a week later in a dimly lit bar near Arlington. He was older, worn, his hands trembling slightly as he lifted his glass. "Phoenix Return," he muttered. "You didn't hear that from me?" He scribbled an address on a napkin. "Not everything in that building belongs to history. Some things are there to stay hidden." 2 nights later, Ellen and Jack drove to the location, a nondescript warehouse surrounded by chain-link fencing. They parked across the street, hearts pounding. Through a gap in the gate, they could see a guard shack, a single light glowing inside. For a moment, Ellen thought about turning back, but she couldn't. Not now. Jack slipped through first, cutting the fence with quiet precision. Inside, the air smelled of metal and damp paper. Rows of file cabinets stretched into the darkness like endless corridors. They moved carefully, flashlights trembling in their hands. Then Ellen saw it, a cabinet marked 1973-1978 Repatriation and Recovery. Her hands shook as she pulled the drawer open. Inside were folders labeled by state, then by name. She flipped through them, desperate, until she reached it. Anders, Michael R. The folder was thin. Too thin. Inside were only 2 pages. One was the same form she'd been sent years ago, missing in action. The other was newer, stamped restricted. Across the top, 3 words made her blood run cold. Transfer not confirmed. She stared at it, unable to breathe. Transfer. To where? Jack whispered. "We need to go." But Ellen stood frozen, eyes locked on the final line of the report. Subject last sighted, Site 14, status unknown. Beneath it, a date. 1979. 6 years after the war was declared over, they barely made it out. Tires screeched in the distance, flashlights cutting through the fog. By the time they reached the car, sirens wailed faintly behind them. They drove in silence until the city lights faded into darkness. At dawn, Ellen sat on a park bench, holding the document in both hands. The words blurred in the rising light. The truth was finally visible, but it offered no peace. If Michael had been transferred, he hadn't been forgotten. He'd been traded for what? The answer came weeks later from an unexpected place. A former intelligence officer, terminally ill, who requested to meet her before time runs out. They met in a hospital room smelling of disinfectant and regret. His voice was little more than a whisper. "We needed something," he said. "Diplomatic leverage. Vietnam had them, Laos too. Some men were kept as collateral. Some were moved north. We were told it was temporary. Then politics changed and they became inconvenient." Ellen's voice broke. "So they were alive." The man nodded weakly. "For a time." She wanted to scream, but no sound came out. "Why didn't anyone tell us?" He closed his eyes. "Because no one wanted to own it. Easier to call them dead than admit they were bargaining chips." He died 3 days later. Ellen stood at his graveside, wind tearing through the cemetery trees. She thought of the warehouse, the missing folders, the date on that report, 1979. She thought of her son, older now if he lived, perhaps even unrecognizable, and she wondered how many more mothers carried this same quiet terror. That night, unable to sleep, she placed the document under her lamp. Her eyes traced the faded ink again and again until she noticed something she hadn't seen before. A faint watermark pressed into the paper. 3 letters almost invisible under the light. S14, Site 14. The last place he was seen. Somewhere out there. Hidden behind walls of secrecy and jungle. A place with that name still existed, and as Ellen stared into the dark, she made herself a promise. She would find it, whatever it took, because if the world had turned her son into a secret, she would become the storm that exposed it. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky, long and low, as if the earth itself was whispering the truth, one the living were still too afraid to speak. Ghosts that walk in daylight, it began with a whisper on the wind, soft, uncertain, almost shy. The kind of whisper that makes you turn your head, knowing something or someone has remembered your name. By 1991, most Americans had stopped speaking about the missing. New wars filled the headlines, and the old one had settled into memory. But for Ellen, the past was alive. It breathed in the sound of rain, it hid in the ticking of clocks, it waited inside every unopened envelope. She lived alone now, in a small house filled with photographs that never aged. Her son's room remained untouched, the bed still made, his baseball glove still on the shelf. Time had moved everywhere else, but not here. Here it stood still. One morning, a letter arrived with no return address. The handwriting was careful, almost formal, as if the writer feared his own words. Inside was a single photograph, color, slightly faded, showing a clearing in what looked like dense forest. A small sign stood near a crumbling structure. On it, painted in white, were the faint letters, S14, her breath caught. The same code stamped on that government file years earlier, Site 14. The back of the photo bore a date, 1989, and a scrawled message, "He's not where they said." For a moment, the room seemed to tilt. The light grew strange. The air hummed with the weight of memory. Ellen sat at the kitchen table, staring at the picture, feeling time close its fist around her heart. She knew what she had to do. A week later, she boarded a plane to Thailand. The League was gone now. No one remained to argue with her. The world thought she was chasing ghosts. Maybe she was, but sometimes ghosts were the only ones who told the truth. The journey to the border was long, the kind that strips a person down to silence. She found a guide in a small riverside town, a wiry man named Somchai who claimed to have worked with American teams years ago. When she showed him the photograph, he looked at it for a long time without speaking. Then he said quietly, "This place is not on maps." They traveled by boat along the Mekong, its brown water glimmering like dull metal under the sun. On the opposite bank, Laos stretched endlessly green and still. Ellen watched the jungle roll by and felt a strange calm settle over her. Whatever she found, or didn't find, this was the end of waiting. After 2 days, they reached a narrow path leading inland. Somchai warned her it was dangerous, that soldiers still patrolled the region. But Ellen only nodded. Fear had burned out of her long ago. They moved through the forest as if walking through a memory, everything dense, wet, alive. The trees whispered in the wind, their roots tangled like secrets. Hours passed before they saw it, a clearing half swallowed by vines and grass. The remains of wooden posts jutted from the ground. A rusted sign leaned against a tree. Faint white paint barely visible through years of decay. S14. Ellen's knees went weak. She stepped closer, her hands trembling. Beneath the vines, she found fragments of metal, broken chains, old locks, the faint outline of what had once been a fence. The air felt thick, heavy with something unseen but undeniable. "This was a camp," Somchai murmured. "Long ago." She knelt in the dirt, brushing away the leaves. And then she saw it, a small piece of metal, dull and corroded. She picked it up, wiped the mud away, and froze. It was a dog tag. The name was worn, but still visible, M.R. Anders. For a long moment, she couldn't breathe. The jungle around her vanished. The sound of cicadas faded. Only the metal in her hand felt real, cold, sharp, proof. Proof that he had been here. Somchai's eyes widened. "You know this man?" Ellen nodded slowly, tears cutting through the dirt on her face. "He's my son." They buried the tag back in the earth, marking the spot with a single stone. It wasn't a grave, not really, but it was something. Something she could hold on to. That night, they camped by the river. The jungle sang its strange song, and Ellen stared into the fire, feeling the years fall away. She thought of the young man who left home with laughter in his eyes, and the mother who had waited half her life for his return. But just as peace began to find her, Somchai spoke. "There's more," he said softly. "You should know." He told her of stories whispered by villagers, of men seen years after the war, working under guard, building roads and bridges deep in the mountains. Some said they were Americans. Some said they spoke English. And one story, the oldest of them all, spoke of a man who escaped. They said he made it across the river, Somchai whispered. But when he tried to go home, no one believed him. Ellen stared into the flames. "What happened to him?" "No one knows. He vanished again." The fire cracked, sending sparks into the night sky. The sound reminded her of Morse code, brief bursts of light calling out to whoever might still be listening. She lay awake until dawn, listening to the river whisper against the rocks, wondering if her son had ever heard it too. When she returned to the United States, the world was older, grayer. The war had become a chapter in history books. But Ellen carried something the books never would, that dog tag, heavy as truth. She presented it to the Defense Department, demanding an investigation. They took it, examined it, and weeks later returned with an answer. Unable to authenticate. Possible forgery. Her hand shook as she read the report. The same cold, careful language. The same walls of denial. She realized then that her son's story would never be written in their records. It would live only in the spaces between. Still, something unexpected happened. The photograph and the dog tag were leaked to the press. Newspapers called it the Ghost of Site 14. Television shows speculated. Former intelligence officers debated whether American prisoners had truly been left behind. And for a brief moment, the silence cracked. People remembered again. Ellen became a symbol, a quiet, relentless mother who refused to let the past be buried. Reporters came, cameras flashed, but she never sought fame. "I only want the truth," she said again and again. Years passed. The world changed. One by one, the families of the missing grew old. Some gave up, some held on. Ellen, now in her late 70s, sat by the same kitchen window where she once waited for letters. The dog tag rested in a glass case beside her chair. One evening, as the sun dipped low, the phone rang. The voice on the other end was male, gentle but uncertain. "Mrs. Anders," it said. "I don't know if this matters anymore, but I think you should know. I was stationed in Laos, years after the war. We found a man once, American, older, said he was from Kansas. Said his name was Mike." Her heart stopped. "What happened to him?" she whispered. The line crackled. "He was sick. They moved him before we could report it. I don't know where, but he said one thing before they took him away. He said, 'Tell my mother I'm still trying.'" The call ended. Ellen sat there silent, her hands trembling. The evening light turned the room gold. For the first time in her life, she didn't know whether to cry or smile. Somewhere between grief and belief, a strange calm filled her chest. Outside, the sky darkened. The wind picked up, carrying with it the soft hum of something distant. It might have been the sound of a radio, or maybe just memory, replaying itself one last time. Either way, the message was the same. He never stopped trying, and in that echo, the faint, unbroken heartbeat of all the missing, Ellen understood. Some ghosts don't haunt to be mourned. They haunt to remind the living that the story isn't finished.